Srimad Bhagavatam Grantaraj Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Janma Yasya Yato Niviyad Ditaratas Jate Swavidya Swara. Tene Brahma Hridaya Adhikavaye Muyanti Yatsurayaha. Tejo Varimidam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Tisargo Misha.
Tejo Varimrida Jata Vinimayo Jatra Trisagamisya.
Dhamnasvena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dimahi.
Dhamnasvena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dimahi.
O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O my Lord Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O all-pervading personality of Godhead.
O all-pervading personality of Godhead.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
Offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
Of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes.
Of the creation, sustenance, destruction of the manifested universes.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
And he's independent because there's no other cause beyond him.
And he is independent because there's no other cause beyond him.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji.
He is the only person imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji.
The original living being.
The original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
Of water seen on fire or land seen on water.
Water seen the fire or land seen the water.
Only because of him do the material universes.
Only because of him do the material universes.
Temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature.
Temporarily manifested by the reaction of the three modes of nature.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna.
Who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode.
Who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode.
Which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world.
Which is forever free from the illusory representation of the material world.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
Dharma projita kaitavotra.
Dharma projita kaitavotra.
Paramo nirmatsaranam satam.
Paramo nirmatsaranam satam.
Vedyam vastavam atra vastu.
Vedyam vastavam astra vastu.
Shivadam tapa trayon mulanam.
Shivadam taputrayan mulanam.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Kim va parir Ishwaraha.
Kim va parir Ishwaraha.
Sadyo hriti avarudya tetra.
Sadyo hriti avarudya tetra.
Kriti bihi sususubhistakshanat.
Kriti bihi sususubhistakshanat.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truths.
This Bhagavad Purana propounds the high truth.
Which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
Which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
The highest truth, the reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity.
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by great sage Vyasadeva's maturity.
Is sufficient in itself for God realization.
It's sufficient itself for God realization.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scripture?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam.
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam.
By this culture of knowledge.
By this culture of knowledge.
The Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
The Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
Sukhamukad amrita dravya samyatam.
Sukhamukad amrita dravya sangitam.
Pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam.
Pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam.
Muhur ahoraska bhuvi bhavukaha.
Murahu Rasika Bhuvi Bhavuka.
O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam,
O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam,
the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures.
the mature fruit, the desire tree of Vedic literature.
It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
It emanated from the lips of Sri Shukadev Goswami.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Therefore, this food has become even more tasteful.
Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
Although its nectarian juice was all relishable for all,
including liberated souls.
including liberated souls.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna,
Shramvantam Swakata Krishna,
Punya Shravana Kirtana,
Punya Shravana Kirtana,
Hridyantaksto hi abhadrani,
Vidyantas Tuhya Bhadrani,
Vidunati Suhitsatam.
Vidunoti Surit Satam.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
or to hear from it directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
is itself righteous activity.
it is self-righteous activity.
And for one who hears about Krishna,
And for one who hears about Krishna,
Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart,
Lord Krishna is dwelling within everyone's heart,
acts as a best wishing friend,
acts as the best wishing
and
friend,
purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him.
and purifies the devotee who constantly engaged in hearing of
Nasta
him.
presu badvesu
Nasta Praishwa Bhadrishu
nityam bhagavata sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
bhagavati utama sloke
Bhagavati Uttama Sloke
bhaktir bhavati naistiki.
Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops the dormant transcendental knowledge.
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
and from the
and
devotees,
from the devotees,
he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
he becomes fixed in devotional service of the Lord.
Tadarajas tumo bhava
Tadarajastamo Bhava
kamaluba dayaschaye
Kamalobhadayasya
cheta itar inavidam
Cheta Itar Navidam
stitvam sattve prasidati.
Stitam Sarve Prasidati.
By development of devotional service,
By development of devotional service,
one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance,
one becomes free from the modes of passion and ignorance.
and thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
And this material lust and avarice are diminished.
Evam prasana manaso
Evam prasanna manaso
bhagavat bhakti yogataha
Bhagavat Bhaktiyo
bhagavat tattva vijnanam
Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam
mukta sangasya jayate.
Mukta Sangasya Jayate.
By development of devotional service,
By development of devotional service,
one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance,
one becomes free from the modes,
and thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
and this material lust and avarice are diminished.
Evam prasana manaso
Evam prasanna manaso
bhagavat bhakti yogataha
Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata
bhagavat tattva vijnanam
Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam
mukta sangasya jayate.
Mukta Sangasya Jayate.
When these impurities are wiped away,
When these impurities are wiped
the
away,
candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness.
the candidate remains steady in a position of pure
Becomes
goodness.
enlivened by devotional service
Becomes enlivened by devotional service
and understands the science of God perfectly.
and understands the science of God perfectly.
Vidyate hridaya grantis
Vidyate Hridaya Granthi
chidyante sarva samsaya
Chidyante Sarva Samsaya
shiyante chasya karmani
Chidyante Chashta Karmani
justa evat manishwari.
Drusta Evatmaneshwari.
Thus bhakti yoga severs the hard knot of material affection
Thus the Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection
and enables one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram,
and enables one to come to the stage of Samsham Samagrama,
understanding of the supreme absolute truth personality of Godhead.
understanding the supreme absolute truth personality of Godhead.
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotees in Krishna consciousness
can one understand the science of Krishna.
can one understand the science of Krishna.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 18, text
44.
44, yeah. Tadadyana papam upait ananvayam
Taradhyana papamupatyam vayam
yanastanata shivasur vilumpakat.
Yanna sanata savayo vilumpakat.
Parasparam ginanti sapanti vrinjate.
Parasparam ganti sapanti vinjate.
Pasun striyoritan purudas yavo janaha.
Pasun striyuritan puru dasavo jana.
Translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Due to the termination of the monarchical regimes and the plundering of the people's wealth by rogues and thieves, there will be great social disruptions. People will be killed and injured, and animals and women will be stolen. And for all these sins, we shall be responsible. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So this is Samikya Rishi speaking to his son, Shringi. The word na, we, is very significant in this verse. The sage rightly takes responsibility of the brahmanas as a community for killing monarchical government and thus giving an opportunity to the so-called democrats, who are generally plunderers of the wealth of the state subjects. The so-called democrats capture the administrative machine without assuming responsibility for the prosperous condition of the citizens. Everyone captures the post for personal gratification, and thus, instead of one king, a number of irresponsible kings grow up to tax the citizens. It is foretold herein that in the absence of good monarchical government, everyone will be the cause of disturbance for others by plundering riches, animals, women, etc. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So, of course, when it says Democrats, it doesn't only refer to the Democrat Party. It refers to everybody who supports demon crazy or democracy. Because in democracy, the qualification of a person to vote is not taken into account. It might have been in the beginning. Like in the United States, up until I think it was the 1920s or just before that, women were not allowed to vote. Why is that? Why do you think? Women were not allowed to vote. Anybody know? Huh? What was that mumbling over there? Well, that is probably true. That that thought was there, but then women got to vote, and up until around the 1920s. By the way, World War I changed a lot in American society, because many young men and some young women went to Europe and saw European culture. And of course, they were fighting in a terrible war, but they got introduced to European culture. See, Americans were they didn't like European culture so much. Of course, they revolted against the British. Right? The French helped them in some ways to win the Revolutionary War against the British. But, and so there was some closer relationship between France and the United States. And many of the people that immigrated to the United States were Europeans. Most of the first big waves of immigration was from Europe. So, but people were trying to get away from Europe because of all the stringent controls on religion and different types of problems with the governments there. You know, of course, the French revolted after the American Revolution. The French revolted against the Emperor or King of France, cut his head off, killed many nobles, and tried to imitate a little bit the American system. Eventually, even in England, the democratic system or democracy became prevalent, even though they still have the king and queen in England still. King and queen are just titular heads. They're just ceremonial positions. They don't have a lot of authority. They have a little authority, but not much. So all these European countries, which before had monarchies, they all, one by one, dropped the monarchical system or made some kind of a hybrid with a showpiece monarchy, but really the power is in the hands of the democratic process of government. So what happened is that these European philosophies, European type of educational system, all these things little by little crept into America and were adopted by the Americans. And although they revolted, but now most of these people came from Europe, and little by little the system of this representative government. We don't have a real democracy. Although we call it a democracy, it's actually called a representative democracy. That means we vote to elect people, and there's two houses there's three sections of the government, but there's two houses of legislative section. You have the House of Representatives based on the population of the states, and then you have the Senate, which is arbitrarily two representatives from each state. And that's very interesting because the founders were, although most of what they did was based on speculation. Sometimes they say they were all Christians, but actually they were Christians. They were watered down and diluted by the Enlightenment philosophers such as John Locke and others, who were not traditional Christians. They were they believed in speculation, and they believed they had some allegiance to the Bible, but it was not really that strong, although they claimed to be. So you see that the American Constitution of the United States was very influenced by John Locke and other Enlightenment philosophers of the 17th, 18th century. And so they made this checks and balances so that everyone would join the union of states. So there were some states that had very little population, other states had bigger population, and to balance it off, the House of Representatives, you have like 400 or 500 people that are elected based on the population of the states, and the Senate is not based on the population. Every state gets 2 senators. That's it. So that way there's some balance, and the senators are voted for 6 years, and the House of Representatives voted in for 2 years. So therefore, the House of Representatives can change abruptly every 2 years sometimes, but the Senate people are more stable, and they are considered to be more, let's say, deliberative, think things out more carefully, and not be quick to judgment. Just like we see, it was already predicted by the founders of the Constitution that the possibility to impeach a sitting president should not be used whimsically for political reasons. It should only be used for high crimes and misdemeanors. But we see that the Democrats have impeached Trump twice now. Now, impeachment doesn't mean he's kicked out. It means that it's like an indictment, right? There's grounds to have him thrown out, but it's the Senate that makes the final decision, not the House of Representatives. They just examine the evidence and say, yeah, there's enough evidence here to throw him out. But then it's up to the Senate to actually decide to throw out the president. But, the whole idea was it should not be used for political purposes. It only should be used in case where the president commits high crimes and misdemeanors. Well, this is all because there's inherent distrust of people being invested with authority, because none of them are being trained as the king was trained in previous times, Vedic times. It's like Maharaj Parikshit was trained, Yudhisthira Maharaj was trained, Prithu Maharaj was trained, Priyavata was trained. They were all highly trained Raja Rishis, saintly kings, and they had tremendous training in Krishna consciousness. Prahlad Maharaj was a king, right? He's the emperor of almost the whole universe. But he was trained to take that position, trained in Krishna consciousness, which is transcendental even to the modes of material nature, even it's transcendental even to the varnas and the ashramas. So that was the high level of qualification needed to become king. Well, fast forward to Kali Yuga and now the 18th, 19th, 20th century, people are not trained anymore in the mode of goodness or transcendental goodness. Therefore, they set up this government with a lot of checks and balances, but it doesn't really solve the problem that one person cannot be trusted with tremendous authority. This was why people wanted to get rid of Trump. They thought he was getting too much authority, and then he was not qualified to have so much authority. And then not only him, but other presidents have been impeached. Other presidents have been thrown out in the United States. Members of the House of Representatives have been thrown out. Members of the Senate have been thrown out. Judges have been thrown out because they proved to be low-class people. So this type of government will not really work, because the spiritual credentials of a person, their morality, their ethical behavior, all that has to be examined before such a person can be invested with authority. But that's not happening. So therefore they set up this phony system called democracy, checks and balances, but it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. So Samikya Rishi takes responsibility of the Brahmanas as a community for killing monarchical government and thus giving an opportunity to the so-called Democrats, who are generally plunderers of the wealth of the state subjects. So Democrats, of course, refers to those people who believe in democracy, not that it's only the one party, the Democrat Party. All the parties are corrupt in the sense that they'll put forward people to be voted in to positions who are not qualified to have those positions. And therefore the decisions that they make are fluctuating all the ways. Like, for example, from the founding of the United States till the 1960s, abortion was not allowed. But they voted in the 1960s to make abortion legal. That means murdering unborn or born children. So, and they call it moral, and they call it, a heroic act. But infanticide is not a heroic act, it's murder. So, in the name of democracy, in the name of so-called, deliberative, what do you call, thinking or enlightened thinking, they've passed so many, or they've changed so many rules and ethical principles and moral principles, and made morality, replaced morality with immorality, and goodness with evil, and legislated into law. So this began with Shringi, and eventually almost the whole Brahminical community in Kali Yuga has been corrupted. And therefore, the democratic type of governments have taken over. And generally, Prabhupada said, generally they are plunderers of the wealth of the state subjects. Well, yeah. I mean, for example, in Germany, Hitler was voted in, and the Nazi Party was voted into power. Of course, they manipulated things, but Hitler was a corporal, a very low officer in the German army in World War I, and he was his livelihood before he was in the army, he was a house painter, right? A very insignificant person, and he rises up to become this charismatic, crazy, and vicious leader. So, and he was followed by hundreds and thousands of people. So, just because he was a dynamic speaker, actually Prabhupada says that people like Hitler, Stalin, and other great despotic leaders are actually Rakshasas who live on the asteroids, and every once in a while they descend on the earth to create havoc. Now look at Hitler. He was only in the government for 12 years. But in 12 years, he tremendously built up the economy and military community in Germany, and science and all that stuff, and used it all to destroy other countries, and eventually he was destroyed and Germany was destroyed. But at one point, the people were ecstatic, especially when he conquered France and the Netherlands and Czechoslovakia and Poland. And he was like, if he had won that war, he would be deified. He would have become God. People were completely surrendered to him. So this is what happens when low-class people are able to get the votes of the people. And the Nazi Party was voted in some kind of so-called democratic process. And then once he got in, he turned it into a dictatorship through terror and murder and execution and so forth. Stalin did the same thing in Russia. Even though before there was the monarchy in Russia, and then the communists and the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks and all these communist-type parties killed the Tsar and his whole family, so that there would be no family members left to take over in case they wanted to resume the monarchy. And then they basically established a dictatorship. But even in that dictatorship, there was voting. And somehow or other, Lenin was the first leader, and after Lenin, there was infighting, and Stalin eventually killed all his rivals and became an absolute dictator. So we see that in the communist state, it never became a pure communist state, and that's why it failed. Pure communist state is not supposed to be a dictatorship. Pure communist state, it's the people that own everything in community. But that never happened. There was attempts at that, but it didn't happen. Why? Because you cannot have a classless society. Because Krishna says, Chaturvanya Maya Shristam Guna Karma Vibhaga Sahani. From the beginning of time, he's created these 4 varnas. And you can't eliminate them. And that's what happened in the Soviet Union. They tried for as hard as they could to eliminate the 4 natural classes of people, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras, and they failed. By the time of Gorbachev, there were 4 classes again in the Soviet Union, even though it was a communist state. You had businessmen, factory managers. In name, they didn't own the factories. Everything was owned by the state, but still, they became factory managers. And then you had the intellectuals, and you had the military men, and you had the workers. They did not eliminate the 4 classes, although they tried. They couldn't even eliminate the religion, although they tried really hard by closing down churches, killing priests and things like that. Still, they didn't eliminate it. See? Just like they can't control population. They have so much birth control and things like that, but still the population increases. So the only thing they can advance in is killing people. But even then, they've never succeeded in killing everybody. But why? Because man cannot destroy what God has created. They can only destroy what they have created, like buildings and factories and airplanes and tanks and guns and things like that. But they can't destroy the earth. They can't destroy the sun. They can't destroy any of that stuff. They can't destroy the environment. All these things are created by Krishna, and he's set up a system for their maintenance. So all they can do is break the laws of material nature and then suffer. That's what they can do, and that's what they're good at doing. So here it says that the so-called Democrats capture the administrative machine without assuming responsibility for the prosperous condition of the citizens. Well, right now, what's going on? We're saying that there is, the government is giving free money to people, to everyone. This is the second time I've received $1,200 from the government, right? Huh?
Now they are offering 1,600 per person.
That's a new one.
Yeah, new one.
They're talking with some 2,000, and then they gave 6 first, and then they're talking with 1,400 now.
I don't know what you're talking about exactly, but I know that I have received $1,200 2 times from the government. Okay?
They are giving again.
Yeah, and there's going to be another one, another round. You know.
Jai.
So, how long can they go on doing that? Plus, they're doing the PPP free grants, basically, that you don't have to pay back to companies who have employees, so the employees are not fired. And they're also giving loans that are very low interest. And so you see, how are they doing this? They're either borrowing money from the Chinese or they're printing money that's not backed up with anything, right? So the whole thing, why? So that people don't revolt. Doesn't matter who's in charge, the Republicans or the Democrats. If they don't do this, the people are going to revolt. They're going to go out in the streets and riot, burn, because they don't have enough money to eat. They lose their mortgages, just like Governor Lindsay just now is trying to get a law passed that you cannot evict a person from a home or apartment.
I mean, one more law passed, they have in the proposal that whatever the theft with the property related, if it's linked to the poverty, it's not treated as a theft or something. So they can pretty much go and do robbery or something.
Well, I mean,
That concept they already put there.
because they don't want to have a huge number of homeless people. Normally, they were artificially keeping people in their homes who were like not working and not earning anything and just getting a little money from the government, but are not able to pay their mortgages. And that was supposed to end in January. So now they're going to extend it, where if you own a house that you're renting, you cannot force the people to pay rent. You can't throw them out for the next 2 years. And then who knows what they're going to do after 2 years. It depends on the economy. So we see it is a horrible mess. And there's the coronavirus, all these things. And what's the cause of it all? It's sinful activity. They don't say, let's stop sinful activity. Let's all, worship God and stop sinful activity, meat eating, gambling, illicit sex, and toxic. No one is saying that. They're saying, okay, we'll give you free money. We'll pass these laws that are completely unfair. That, if somebody bought a second house and is renting it out for their retirement, now they won't be able to get any money from it, if people don't want to pay. It's, some people will pay because they're honest, but there are many people who can't pay or don't want to pay. And you can't throw them out of the house, and you can't get any money. And if you try and do it, you'll be prosecuted as a criminal. So,
Next level now they are taking is, even if you rob something from somebody, you won't be able.
well, now, no, in Seattle, if a person steals up to $1,000, they are not prosecuted.
Yeah,
They're arrested and then let go free.
because he is poor.
Well, anyway, these are okay. So you see, in democracy, everything is fluid. What was wrong before now can become right. What was right before becomes wrong. Everything's turned around by votes, right? So whether it's direct democracy or representative democracy. Direct democracy means every law has to be voted on by the whole population. Representative democracy means you vote for some people and they vote representing you or not representing you. They can vote any way they want as long as you keep voting for them. So everything is confused and nobody understands what is the real cause of all this suffering and misery. Sinful activity, speculation, unqualified people ruling over all the other unqualified people. So, therefore, greed, lust, anger, all these things have increased to unbearable levels, and society is in turmoil. So all this was predicted. This Bhagavatam was spoken 5,000 years ago by Sukadeva Goswami. All these things are predicted in the Bhagavatam, right? And the cure is also in the Bhagavatam. But who is listening to it? See, nobody's. I mean, most people are not listening to this. And how effective are we in getting this message out to the people? Not very effective. Not very effective. Somewhat, but not really effective. So what do we have to do to get this message out? That's the question. See, you have to create a vyuha. Vyuha is this military phalanx by which you can break through the enemy line and thus, enter into their heart and take prisoners and defeat them. So we have to break through Maya's defensive line that keeps increasing. Like Maya keeps advancing, so that line goes farther and farther away, and it's harder to break. But we have to turn the tide. So you can only turn the tide by giving an example of something that is successful, that makes people happy, that makes them prosperous. Prosperous means you live at home with no debts, and therefore no anxiety, and then you have time to practice Krishna consciousness, and you know how to make a living without working like a beast of burden, 14, 16 hours a day, always in anxiety, always trying to pay one bill and not the next bill, and things like that. So that's the only thing that will influence people when they see other people who are happy, who are good, who are moral, whose kids are good, who have a generational culture of goodness, and who are doing wonderful acts of charity, of mercy, but they themselves are living austerely and simply in harmony with Krishna and nature. And to publicize it, they're doing Harinam Sankirtan, chanting ecstatically, dancing ecstatically, and distributing Mahaprasadam and books and holding programs, festivals, all these things to advertise it. Look, here's the solution. It's very simple. It's not complicated. You just chant, dance, and feast and give up sinful activity, and God will protect you and supply everything you need. In previous ages, they didn't have to build, to excavate the earth. They didn't have to go to outer space. No. Nature was providing everything naturally and easily so that all their needs were provided without working so hard. And there was no big industries or anything like that. So anyway, we've read some of those things in the Bhagavatam. But everything depends on good leadership and a strong Brahminical community, but actually Brahmana Vaishnavas, not just Brahmins, but Brahmana Vaishnavas. And therefore, no irresponsible people are rulers or kings or managers. So it says, it is foretold herein, in this 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that in the absence of good monarchical government, everyone will be the cause of disturbance for others by plundering riches, animals, women, etc. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Are there any questions?
So it is kind of assumed that Kali Yuga will have to have its presence according to the Lord's desire, which means that some of this is bound to happen. Now, what is bound to happen according to the Lord's will versus what we're trying to do, which is to somewhat counter that will if we argumentatively take it. But how do we balance this understanding that there is natural desire of the Lord happening in the Kali Yuga, and then how do we?
Well, the Lord has also predicted with the coming of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that there'll be a 10,000-year golden age in this Kali Yuga. And that is because Pritivite Achayata Nagaradi Grama Sarvatma Prachur Haibe Murama. This Harinam Sankirtan will be spread to every town and village. And people will take up this chanting seriously. Chanting, dancing, feasting, and developing Krishna consciousness through bona fide scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, Caitanya Charitamrita, Nectar of Devotion. These are the only 4 books we need to be educated. We don't need any other books. Actually, I'm going to read something very interesting. Prabhupada says, he says, there's so many pages, I get confused. He says, one should not partially study a book just to pose oneself as a great scholar by being able to refer to scriptures. In our Krishna consciousness movement, we have therefore limited our study of the Vedic literatures to the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Caitanya Charitamrita, and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. These 4 works or books are sufficient for preaching purposes. They are adequate for the understanding of the philosophy and the spreading of missionary activities all over the world. If one studies a particular book, he must do so thoroughly. That is the principle. By thoroughly studying a limited number of books, one can understand the philosophy. In the previous paragraph, he said, accepting an unlimited number of disciples or devotees is very risky for one who is not a preacher. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, a preacher has to accept many disciples to expand the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is risky because when a spiritual master accepts a disciple, he naturally accepts the disciple's sinful activities and their reactions. Unless he is very powerful, he cannot assimilate all the sinful reactions of his disciples and has to suffer the consequences. Therefore, one is generally forbidden to accept many disciples. And then the next thing is, it says, you're not supposed to read different books so that without studying them thoroughly, just so you can say, well, it says in this Purana, and it says in this book, and it says in that, so that you look like you're some very intelligent person. You're only supposed to read 1 or 2 or 3 or maximum 4 books and study them thoroughly, and you'll be perfectly educated, and you'll be able to convince anyone of the bona fide nature of Krishna consciousness, you see. So, what is it we have to do? We have to assimilate this knowledge by carefully studying Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Caitanya Charitamrita, Nectar devotion, and then preach through Sankirtan, book distribution, prasadam distribution, chanting and dancing in ecstasy in public. And this is what's going to change society. This is what is going to make the difference in Kali Yuga for this 10,000 years. So although it's predicted that Kali Yuga will take over in a very significant way, but yet there's this window of 10,000 years by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So we have to become very active and take this Krishna consciousness and Harinam Sankirtan to every town and village. That will change things. Okay. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.